Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another Learning Lunch hosted by Format Approved. My name is Brian Johnson. I'm the Senior Director of Online Education with Format Approved, and I'll be your moderator today. Today's Learning Lunch title is, What's Next for Meaningful Use? We are joined today again by Joy Rios of Format Approved and Practice Transformation. Joy is an expert in both meaningful use and EHR proficiency with years of real-world experience in attestation, EHR implementation, and workflow. Joy has a unique talent for taking difficult material such as meaningful use and explaining it in real-world terms that anyone can understand. So thank you again for joining us, Joy. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Brian.
And as you can see, you can follow Joy on Twitter at AskJoyRios. While I go over some quick housekeeping notes, you can look at the questions we're going to cover today. We always like to let you get an advance look at those. Remember that you can ask questions of Joy at any time during today's session by entering them into the chat area. We hold those questions until the end of the presentation, but then we'll address as many questions as time allows. If we do run out of time, answers to all submitted questions will be posted to our website and sent via email link later in the week. So we take your questions and share them with Joy, and she'll give you written answers that we'll share with you afterwards. Remember again that all registered attendees of today's session will receive an email with links to both slides and a video recording of this event. So if you're worried about getting your hands on the slides, don't worry about it. We're going to send those out after the event. All right, let's get into it. Joy, so to begin, I'm sure that most people on the call have probably heard about the flexibility rule that was issued. What did it change?
Well, for those that don't know, their CMS published a flexibility rule on August 29th, and it was the Friday, I think at 4 p.m., right before Labor Day weekend, on that announcement about what providers can attest to this year, and mainly it has to do with the certification of the EHR. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, a lot of providers and healthcare organizations had trouble implementing the 2014 edition certified EHRs and getting up to date and trained. So that is what was addressed. So these final rule changes, they actually changed the meaningful use stage timeline and then the definition of what is a certified EHR technology that allow options in the use of that technology for this year, for the 2014 EHR reporting period. And then it also sets the requirements for reporting on meaningful use objectives and measures, as well as the clinical quality measure reporting in this year, in 2014, for providers who use one of those, the certified EHR technology options. And essentially what the rule allows for is providers to meet meaningful use with EHRs that are certified to either the 2011 edition, the 2014 edition, or a combination of the two. It does not change the reporting requirements for 2015. So be aware that this is only for, this particular rule is only affecting 2014. And then the other thing that it does is that it extends stage 2, it pushed it out 1 year. So they were originally set to start stage 3 in 2016, and now the very, very earliest that they will start stage 3 reporting will be 2017.
All right, so just to break that down again, in practical terms, what this means really is that for people who are expecting that they'd have to start stage 2 this year, they have the option of continuing stage 1. Is that a fair way of describing it?
Yes and no. We're going to get into that, but a lot of it has to do with the technology they were able to upgrade to. So a lot of providers didn't have control over their vendors' timeline, about their development timeline, whether they were actually able to upgrade their technology and meet all the new required criteria for it to be a certified EHR. And they also didn't have control over where they were in line for their vendors to upgrade their systems. And they also didn't have control about their vendors' certification timeline. So there were only 3 certifying bodies that actually control certification of EHR technology. And imagine 1,000 EHR vendors are in line to top, and then one of them dropped out. So then they all had to go to work with 2 different major vendors. So I think CMS recognized that those were all real challenges and decided to allow some flexibility for people that face those directly.
So what are the impacts then of the Stage 2 extension?
Well, so the rule extended Stage 2 through 2016, meaning that the soonest Stage 3 would begin is now in 2017. And part of the reason why that is important is, as you know, there's been a lot of drop-off. If you don't have very many people that have been able to certify or upgrade their technologies to the 2014, well, that means that they're literally incapable of attesting to Stage 2, because that's what that whole certification criteria was for. And CMS is using a lot of this attestation data to help inform, them on what works, what doesn't work, what's successful, and what can we bring into Stage 3. So I think that they've pushed it out a year specifically so that they can gather more data from users and have an idea of, what's going on and what works and what doesn't work. So it allows providers who were early adopters that maybe started in 2011 or 2012 to remain in Stage 2 for an additional year. So they may those folks may have reported Stage 1 for a total of 3 years, and they may be in a position that they can report Stage 2 for a total of 3 years. And lastly, it gives the providers time to get them and their staff used to using these new systems and getting their behavior changed to adjusting to the Stage 2 criteria, and importantly, getting the technology developers, so the people that are working on building EHR, it gives them time to develop to whatever those new standards are. So a lot of that is going to have to do with interoperability and being able to exchange data and kind of pushing those goals forward. And I think they're realizing that they just need a little bit more time. So we'll see if it's really going to be in 2017. Who knows, maybe they'll end up pushing it out another year, but time will tell.
Okay, well, this is a great question. What does 2014 CEHRT flexibility really mean then?
Well, I wanted to point out, because we're going to go into what the options are, I believe, in the next slide. So for folks that have whichever version of certified EHR implemented in their practice, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can just do, report Stage 1 or report whatever you want. So they really specified within the rule to say that providers who were, quote unquote, unable to fully implement 2014 certified EHR technology for this reporting, for any reporting period in 2014, those are the ones that have flexibility. So if you in your practice actually did upgrade to 2014 certified EHR, if you have made that change within your practice and you are set to report Stage 2 and you have your entire staff trained on that system, then you should probably go ahead and report the stage from this, from the technology that you are capable. So I think what they are trying to encourage people to do is to meet their highest level of possible performance for their attestation. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so.
And then actually one other thing, they changed also, so for Medicaid participants. Now remember, you have for For Medicaid, they have that first year that is adopt, implement, or upgrade to certified EHR technology. Now, if somebody is a first-time provider, if this is, or a first-time attester, if this is their first year participating in the program, for 2014, they're not accepting attestations from 2011 certified EHR technology. It must be from 2014. And I would imagine that they are trying to set people up for success in the long run. They certainly don't want people to get started on the program on 2011 certified EHR technology if they're only going to have to use 2014 next year.
Yeah, really, so, what's the point?
Yeah, that would, I mean, there's no need for extra disruption or extra stress within a practice. So if you are, especially a Medicaid participant in the EHR incentive program, make sure you get off on the right foot and start with 2014 edition software.
Okay, so what are the options then for stage one? Let's get down to some details.
Okay, so I'm sure many of you have actually seen there is a flow chart, and that's the thing that's been going around. But what I decided to do is break that down a little bit so that we can look at, okay, let's say this is the year, and you are either in your first year or second year of needing meaningful use, which means that you are required to report stage 1 this year in 2014. Now, if it's your absolute first year, then that can be any 90-day period. That has not changed. And if it's your second year, then that 90-day period needs to align with the calendar year quarter if you're in the eligible provider or professional program. Now, it's going to depend on which certified EHR technology you have implemented in your practice. If you still have 2011 certified technology, then you pretty much have one option. You can report the 2013 Stage 1 objectives and the 2013 CQMs. And that right there is the flexibility, I think, that's really important, because CQMs in particular, they changed those for 2014, that it was supposed to be across the board, where CQMs this year and going forward, everyone needed to submit their 9 clinical quality measures that covered those 3 NQS domains. But remember, last year and the year before, it was only 6. So if you are in a position that it is, that you still have your 2011 certified technology, then that's pretty much your option. You are capable of reporting 2013 Stage 1 objectives and 2013 CQMs. No other choice. If you have, say, implemented partial, if you have a combination, it really depends on what that combination is. So, many practices have multiple types of certified EHR technology within their organization. So, even a patient portal counts as a certified EHR technology. So, if you have a combination, depending on what that combination is, you have the options to report either the 2013 Stage 1 objectives and CQMs or the 2014. And then if you have upgraded to the 2014, then it seems somewhat obvious, then you would be reporting to this year's standards. So it's flexibility based on the technology that you have within your organization.
All right, well, what about Stage 2 then? So
similar for Stage 2, so that means that this would be an eligible provider's third year. So in order to be, that means that these folks have already attested to Stage 1 for 2 years in a row, so they would be starting Stage 2. If they still have 2011 certified EHR technology, again, same requirements. If they have a combination, this is where you get a little bit more flexibility, because you can see that you've got, depending, again, on the combination, they can report either 2013 Stage 1 or 2014 Stage 1, or if they're fully ready, and their combination allows them to report the 2014 Stage 2 objectives and the 2014 CQMs. And then this last one, if you're fully upgraded, I would say that this is another option of where they're offering flexibility. So this is a tough one. I would say this is the hardest little box to define about what a provider should do, because if you do have the 2014 edition, and you're scheduled to attest to stage 2, they say that you can report either stage 1 or stage 2, as long as it's the 2014 definition of the objectives in the CQMs. But the advice that people are giving and that I would give is you'd want to report to the level that you are ready and are capable of. So I would say that if you are set to report stage 2 and you have that technology and it's safe to, everyone's been trained on it, you all know how to use it, and you can safely implement it, then go ahead and report stage 2 objectives in the 2014 CQMs.
How does this then change the attestation system? What do people need to pay attention to on that front?
Oh, can we go back? There was one thing I wanted to point out.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sure. So there was one thing that I wanted to point out one thing that CMS said within the final rule. And, it was a 25-page document, and the way that they present this information is they say, these are all the comments that we got, and this is our response. And one of the responses that they had, I thought, was pretty well said. So, they basically said that they appreciate that all of the stakeholders that fully implemented the 2014 edition certified EHR, and that we're able to meet those objectives and measures. And they completely understand the challenges that people are facing in accomplishing their goals. And then they say, we wish to recognize the tremendous amount of work from providers and EHR vendors in meeting these objectives and helping to move health IT forward. But they specifically said that they disagree that the changes somehow give providers that waited until the last minute a free pass, or that they are punishing the providers who are early adopters. And I thought this was an interesting point, because that is talk that, that has been going around. Well, maybe I should have just waited, because then, I wouldn't have had to put so much work into it. But again, a lot of providers didn't have control over their position in the vendor's queue for updating their EHR. They had no influence on the product's development timeline, no participation in the product's movement through the certification process, and all of that has contributed to the overall delay in 2014 edition availability. So their intent in proposing these particular options, this is their words, was not to further complicate the program, but to provide a benefit to certain not to complicate the program, not to provide a benefit to certain providers or to penalize other providers. Rather, they wanted to be responsive to the concerns from providers who were unable to fully implement because of issues related. And giving the additional time to providers who have not otherwise been able to fully implement will allow people to continue participating in the program. So they really want to make sure that meaningful use doesn't die. This is their way, we have to be flexible to allow for more participation. And they really wanted to make sure that EHR vendors and the providers have sufficient time to upgrade and safely and effectively implement this new addition, which in turn results in better health outcomes for the patients. So I just wanted to point out that, it's a strange thing what's going on this year, and to this effect, I think that they are being somewhat reasonable, although it does feel a little bit like those who waited got a little bit more of a benefit, but I guess that's debatable. So anyway, we can move on. I just wanted to point that out.
Well, you could say the same thing about like the ICD-10 delay, for example. A lot of people were ready, and then a lot of people who were procrastinating kind of lucked out that they delayed it for another year. But on the other hand, well, actually, I make that comparison, but maybe it's not a very apt one because I think, ICD-10, there was plenty of time to get ready, whereas here it's really beyond the provider's control. It's not like in ICD-10 they were waiting on software, where here it was really, the problems with certification that drove
Yeah,
this.
but on the flip side, for the folks that have been able to implement and get there, there is a really big difference between 2014 and 2011 edition. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to see it, and you really can do a lot more, and I would not be surprised if people who are implementing and training their staff on this new technology are able to reap other benefits. Maybe they're not getting their meaningful use dollars, or not to say that it's not challenging and difficult and there's a struggle involved, but there certainly are some benefits to upgrading the technology in and of itself.
Well, and that's a great point because ultimately, whatever the regulatory requirements are, they're not the point. I mean, the point of all of this is to drive, the adoption of better technology that has all these other ancillary benefits. So that's a great point.
Right.
All right, well, let's move on then. Back to the attestation system. What does this mean for them?
Well, think about this. So they had to upgrade. The previous attestation, at least on the Medicare, so the federal side, when you do the registration and attestation, you log in and you essentially type in your numerators and denominators, and there's nothing really too technical. But they upgraded it so that, especially on the clinical quality measures, instead of just punching in the numbers, they actually accept a specific type of file. It's a QRDA Category 3 file. And that is just it defines the specifications of what is captured within these clinical quality measures. And they've essentially had to upgrade the technology of the attestation systems themselves. Now, same thing happened on a statewide level. So for any Medicaid program, they had to upgrade all of their systems to be able to accept the information that is coming from this certified EHR technology. Well, now that they've changed the definition of what is acceptable this year, many states are going to have to go back and change and the federal, there's updates to the attestation system that need to be made. And I think on the federal level, things are going to happen a lot quicker. They should have had all of the upgrades, I believe, made by October 1st. So if you are somebody who's ready to attest to whichever stage, to whichever edition, you can probably go, I haven't checked in the last week or so, but you can probably go to their attestation site now and see some upgrades. And what they are introducing is that as you enter your product information, so that EHR certification number, every EHR has one, when you enter that ID into the system, it shows the user what options they have for attesting. So, and then I guess I imagine it'll show up a little bit like a decision tree that you could say, okay, well, this is my EHR, and I'm going to choose either option A, B, or C, depending on which type of EHR that you have. So because of that, they have to create completely new attestation user guides. Those, I haven't seen them yet, but they should be available soon. And one thing I did want to mention is that there's two, I guess this is something I wrote about recently, about a week or two ago, about the unintended consequences of the flexibility rule, and it has to do with this exact thing. So I've confirmed already 2 states, the state of California and the state of Virginia, that their systems are not capable right at the moment of accepting 2011 editions. So they essentially have to backpedal and get their development team ready, and they are not quite sure about timing. So they're saying that it may push out the deadline, like they they may not be able to accept attestations from 2011 edition until after February 28th, 2015. So if you are in a position that you are submitting 2011 edition certified EHR technology through the Medicaid EHR incentive program, I highly, highly, highly recommend checking in with your state and finding out what they are capable of receiving, and just preparing yourself for whatever that answer is. Because I imagine that is just a hiccup, and it's a technical difficulty. It's not, but it's one that could have bigger implications, because if you're not able to submit it, then talk to your CFO or your whoever's working on your forecast or budgeting, because you may not actually receive your incentive money in the time frame that you anticipated. So just throwing that out there.
All right. Well, I want to note for our audience that you can ask questions of Joy at any time. We already have quite a few questions. I'm not surprised by that. So we're going to save those to the end of the presentation. But if you do have a question, feel free to ask it now, and we'll get to it at the end. What about the timing for attestation? So this is a special year. How have things changed in terms of when people need to attest?
Well, I always find people get a little bit confused. I've even gotten confused myself about when you can actually attest. So if this year it's the 90-day reporting period, and as soon as your 90-day reporting period is over, you can essentially start your attestation. So anytime after your reporting period ends, that has not actually changed up until 2 months after the end of the fiscal or calendar year. So that's why you always see the deadline of, for the eligible professional program, the February 28th, the next year, 2015. And they are updating their attestation system. So if you are in a position that you want to take advantage of all the flexibility rule changes, then you would, I'm sure that you haven't started the attestation yet, because, but had you may find yourself running into some technical difficulties. So their systems, they say, will be updated with these new options after, well, they should be after October 1st, so they should have been there within the past week or so. Let me see. Yeah, that's pretty much all. A lot of people don't know that you don't actually have to wait until the end of the year or the end of the full, the full reporting period to attest. As soon as your reporting period ends, you are able. So there hasn't really been too much that's changed on the timing.
All right. And then what about payment adjustments? This is, we're headed into new territory with payment adjustments.
Yeah, well, these were set out by High Tech, so there's actually not, they didn't really touch the payment adjustment. So if anybody is concerned about, what's going to happen, not too much has changed. But just remember that there's a couple different deadlines that have been going around, and I hear a lot of confusion from people. They say, well, there's one that was October 3rd. That was going around. Okay, to avoid the 2015 penalty, people needed to have their first year attestation submitted by October 3rd. Now, the thing to remember about that, and that's before I'm even going to address what's here on this slide, is that that is in relation to the 2013 extension. So the payment adjustments are always put into effect 2 years after the attestation is submitted. So that 2015 payment adjustment that they're talking about for October 3rd relates specifically to 2013. Now, if people want to avoid the 2016 payment adjustment, which is 1% more than the 2015, so remember the payment adjustments increase incrementally by 1% every year, so it would be 1% in 2015, a 2% payment adjustment in 2016, 3% in 2017, and so on, up to 5%. Then people need to be attesting for 2014. So depending on whether you are participating in the eligible hospital program or the eligible professional program, the deadlines are to avoid that penalty. It's the fiscal year, so November 30th, that's coming up in about a month and a half for eligible hospitals, and then that February 28th date for eligible professionals. That's if you want to avoid the 2016 penalty, those are the dates that you need to remember. Now, for this year, and there was a lot of conversation going around the hardship exception. So what if people were unable to implement? What if they were if you're still in a position that you're unable to get your 2014 or even 2011 or whatever the situation is that is under the criteria for a hardship exception. Those new deadlines, that's going to be April 1 next year for April 1 for hospitals and July 1 for eligible professionals. And there is one thing that I believe I will address again later, but it is important to note that the whole 2011 edition software is in relation to this year only. So 2015, 3 months from now and going on, this whole issue of which edition of EHR technology you have is going to come up again. It needs to be 2014. So I guess that's why I'm bringing that up. If you're in a position that you're still unable to do it, you may want to be considering the hardship exception.
So people got a reprieve, but it's very temporary.
That's right. I mean, it's flexible in really big quotation marks.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's a great question as well. What does the flexibility rule not allow?
Right. So I'm sure it's such a detail-oriented thing, but it doesn't allow you to do a mix and match. So if you're able to report 2013 stage 1 objectives, then you need to report, you're not allowed to also report 2014 CQMs. They need to match. So if you're going to do 2013 stage 1 objectives, then you need to do report 2013 CQM requirements. If you're going to report the 2014 edition stage 1 or stage 2 criteria for the objectives and measures, then the CQMs need to match. There was an updated specification to what is captured within CQMs, and this is a funny thing about CMS is that they make some releases in the middle of the year. So in June of 2013, they changed they call them eCQM. So there were some electronic CQM specifications that some technology, and I don't know if 2011, like maybe it was through a patch or something, that some 2011 edition technology may have been able to incorporate these new specifications. So if you are in that situation, they do allow for that June eCQM specification for the clinical quality measures if you're also submitting 2013 objectives and measures. And I know that sounds confusing, but welcome to the world of CMS.
All right, here's something that will strike fear into the hearts of providers, or maybe not. What is the Flex IT Act? I haven't actually heard of this until I reviewed the slides for this session.
Oh, really? This is so happened. It's different than the flexibility rule. This happened early September. Congressman Renee Elmers, she's from North Carolina, submitted a bill or submitted a rule, I guess, or an act to Congress, and the whole idea behind it is to change the reporting period for 2015. So as many of you, I'm sure, have heard, there, people were saying, hey, it's great that there's more flexibility through the flexibility rule, but especially for hospitals, like they're not in a position to report on a full calendar year because, they've got the full fiscal year, which started October 1. So if they were unprepared, then they have essentially already missed out because, they were not able to fully implement. So this, the American Medical Association has done plenty of lobbying and got involved and helped to inform Congressman Elmers to introduce this rule that would change the reporting period for both eligible professionals and eligible hospitals for the 2015 meaningful use reporting period to 90 days. So I have no idea how, when that is going to go through or go any farther or have any type of resolution. But I would say stay tuned on that, and because that could have a huge impact on participation for next year, and potentially put a little bit more of a lifeline in the meaningful use program in general. And if it is past that 90 days, it would be similar to this year. So you would have the 90-day again that aligns to a calendar year quarter or fiscal year quarter.
And the idea here would be, the rationale would be that people may still be struggling with getting an EHR system that has a 2014 CEHRT in place? That would be at least the sensible reason?
Yeah, I think so. I think it has to do, this act in particular doesn't affect the technology or additions or anything like that. It is specifically to address the reporting period. And, some talk around it, which I think is pretty legitimate, is that, if a lot of this has to do with behavioral change. If you've got 90 days or 3 months of people meeting the criteria, that's enough to instill a habit or routine or get things going. It's not, the argument was made that it may not be necessary to have the organizations have to meet it for the full calendar year for 12 full months in order to get the benefits or see the changes that you want to see in the program. And I thought that was I think that's a really good point. I'm really optimistic, hopefully not naively optimistic, but I really am hoping that this one passes because I think that it will allow a lot more healthcare organizations to participate that have been struggling. It's a lot less intimidating, if you've already missed it. Say we're mid-January and somebody's already unable, they're not meeting it, and they're like, well, what's the point? Then might as well not even work towards it. But if you have an opportunity to, ramp up and train and to get to the goal, then I think that there's, a lot more reason to go for it. I think that that's a lot more attainable, essentially. So we'll see.
So what's next for EHR certification then?
Okay, so this is an interesting and probably for many people really boring. They changed. I don't know if you all remember, but back in February of this year, they introduced the voluntary 2015 certification. So right in the midst, when everybody was kind of freaking out about not being able to upgrade to 2014 edition, they went ahead and introduced 2015 edition. So it was already like moving the target. But then they kind of took back and said, well, it's just voluntary. And a lot of people were like, well, why? Okay, great, I'm just going to ignore it. And what happened is that they got a lot of feedback from people that it was pretty darn confusing of why they were doing that, and it felt like it was a little too much too soon. And so they, they went back to the drawing board, and essentially the whole reason around this particular conversation I think it has a lot to do with stage 3. So they have changed their naming conventions. It's now no longer the voluntary 2015 edition because it was introduced in 2014. They're calling it the 2014 edition, release 2, and that essentially means that EHR vendors that are already updated to the 2014 edition, if they want to potentially differentiate or stand out from the crowd, or actually, their argument is that it will actually make it easier for developers to certify going forward, then they can adopt this second release. Now, what's included in these proposals, they say, are, they provides flexibility, clarity, enhances health exchange, information exchange, but really what they did is they made a lot of bug fixes, and they gave a lot of different options, specifically with like certain criteria. So when an EHR certifies, for example, for the CPOE measure, the computerized physician order entry, right now that relates to medications, labs, and radiology, and in the current 2014 edition, in order for it to be certified, it has to be all 3. Now, one of the small details for this second release is that they can certify to just one of those. So depending on it, so they've, among other things, they've taken away the concept of a complete EHR. So they're going to be doing a lot more modular and base EHRs, and I'm not sure that that means very much to most of the users, but to developers and people on the back end, that's really important. And then their naming criteria, they've tried to make it less confusing, and I think that it has to do with the stage 3. So essentially, what I would anticipate happening going forward with this is that if stage 3 is released and starts in 2017, then we're going to see a 2017 edition of certified EHR technology that is also released around the same time. So the whole idea of upgrading and, continuing to, I guess it's like Windows, we used to have Windows 3, or, we're now, I think, on 10.
Although they skipped 9 for some reason.
Yeah, 7, 8, 9, that's why. Because 7, 8, 9.
Yes.
So for the same reason, I imagine the same thing's going to happen with EHR technology. They're just going to continue going forward.
Yeah, but the question is, how many editions will there be between now and 2017?
That's a good question. So what they say is to expect more gradual rulemaking in the future, and they say, like, okay, we're probably going to release new editions every 12 to 18 months. I hope that that is correct, so that it's not so much so quickly that once people change that they need to hurry up and change again. It's a lot of moving targets. But we will see. It may be this whole gradual idea that they do incremental changes. I think that they may do more incremental changes more frequently. And they're saying that they're going to wait every 12 to 18 months, but my personal viewpoint is I don't believe them. That hasn't been their MO in the past, but we shall see. And
so really it sounds like this is more a matter for developers than end users.
Yeah, but that's true. But it is going to affect end users at the end of the day, because they're going to be in a situation where, like, okay, well, it's time to upgrade again. So I wouldn't, just because if you're in a position, you've gone from 2011 to 2014, it's not the end. You're going to see more releases, more additions, but hopefully they won't be so huge, such a big change from one to the other. Hopefully it's something that is, doesn't necessarily change or have huge impacts on your workflow. In an ideal scenario, it would allow for more, just more ease of use of the system. So that would be the ideal. You don't want to make things, hopefully it'll make things more simple and not complicate things further.
All right.
And then, yep, so I've included some, sorry, do you want to?
No, go ahead. So these are resources you've prepared for folks. Now, obviously, they can't click on these links right now, but as I said before, we're going to send these slides out, and they'll be able to go ahead and use these resources. Tell us a little bit about them, if you would.
Right. Sure, no problem. The first one is the interactive decision tool. So if you are still unaware of what your options are, you would need to find out which certified EHR technology you're using, including the version. So which edition, which version. You can find out, okay, well, follow the decision tree to figure out what your options are. Then there's the full flexibility chart, and there's a quick guide to this whole rule instead of reading all of the 25 pages. And then I also introduced the information about the Flex-IT or the Flex-IT Act from Congressman Elmers. If you want to follow that, there is just an intro about what it is, who she is, where it came from, and then for those of you that like technical specs or like looking at, what's going on behind the scenes, feel free to check out the 2014 Release 2 certification fact sheet. So it gives information on background and highlights and, what is non-meaningful use technology versus, why they're, and also like why they are discontinuing the use of the complete EHR. Like probably more information than you ever wanted to know, but there it is.
All right. Well, we have questions and answers. I'm going to go ahead and advance to the next slide because there's useful information there. But we'll talk about some of this here at the very end of our session. We've got an exciting workshop series coming up that Joy is going to teach. So do stay tuned for information about that. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about, or let's go through some of these questions rather. And something that several people have mentioned, I guess this is breaking news, is that CMS just extended the hardship deadlines.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, so people have posted some news about this. Let me see if I can find where it's, just a second. Okay, it looks like the hardship exception application to perhaps November 15th. I'm trying to find, here we go. Hardship exception applications to avoid the adjustments. CMS is announcing its intent to reopen the submission period for hardship exception applications for eligible professionals in EHS to avoid the blah, 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 bureaucratic language. The new deadline will be midnight, November 30th, 2014.
Wow. Okay, so that's to avoid the 2015?
Yes.
Penalty? That makes a lot of sense because they're... the original deadline of July 1, people were going off of, there was the proposed rule that had been out for about a month by that time.
Right.
And,
it wasn't even a final rule. You couldn't even be sure what was going on.
Yeah. So I'm glad that they've done that because that actually allows for even more flexibility for people in planning. And it's not really, I don't really think it's fair to punish people for things that are completely out of their control. So, good. That's great. I'll check that out. Thank you for letting me know.
Okay, let's get to some more questions. I'm not sure I understand this, but maybe you will, and if not, we'll address it offline. It says, what are the deadlines for Medicaid EPs? 2014 is their first year. It says AIU. I don't know what that means, AIU.
Oh, that's adopt, implement, or upgrade.
Oh, of course.
So that would, yeah. So that would be so what's the deadline for the first year for Medicaid AIU? It's the same as the rest. If they said that if you wanted to avoid the 2015 penalty, then you would have had to submit your attestation by October 1st. However, in light of what you've just said about this hardship exception, it might make sense that if you have First, I would make sure that you have 2014 certified EHR technology for your AIU for this year. The generic deadline for submitting that is February 28th, 2015. That's the very last day. Now, as far as not receiving a penalty in 2015, because that's based on 2013 reporting, sounds like you would probably be in a position to submit that hardship exception by November 30th. And they do say that one thing to know about hardship exceptions, it's okay if you actually submit the hardship exception and also are able to submit an attestation and meet the criteria. So it's almost a pretty good CYA approach that, you know, if you are in a position that you think that it might apply to you, I would recommend going ahead and submitting the hardship exception. In fact, there was, I had a client that I submitted one for that, you know, turned out he didn't actually need it because he wasn't able to upgrade to 2014 technology. And I just wanted to make sure that he didn't get hit. And you know, what the worst case scenario is, CMS will review that hardship application and say, hey, this didn't apply to you, which is fine, no harm, no foul. There's really, it's a 1 or 2 page, you know, application that doesn't ask anything out of, you know, that you shouldn't be able to answer within 10 minutes or so. So I would say just make sure that you're, one, whatever you are AIUing, adopting, implementing, or upgrading to, make sure it's 2014 certified. And then, yeah, go with the hardship.
Here's a question about how people proceed through the stages. It says if someone attests MU1 this year, will they be an MU2 in 2015?
So so it's a 5-year program, supposedly, and stage 1 happens, people are supposed to submit attestations for stage 1 for a total of 2 years before they move on to stage 2. If they're in Medicaid, that technically, so that AIU doesn't count as their first year of meeting meaningful use. So it has to be 2 years of actually meeting the meaningful use stage 1 criteria before moving on to stage 2. And then originally they had set it out that it would be 2 years that folks meet stage 1, 2 years of meeting stage 2, and then moving on to stage 3. But for some people it's turning into they're submitting 3, potentially even 4 years of stage 1, you know, 2 years minimum of stage 2, maybe 3. And then continuing on after that.
All right, here's an interesting comment, and I've heard this struggle from other providers, so I'm glad someone made this comment. Here, I'm just going to read it to you. The issues we're having is with late certification of our EMR and implementation of the portal. So the flexibility rule does nothing for anyone who's struggling with the portal implementations if they've already implemented the 2014 certified version. If you have 2014 certified implemented, you have to report on timely electronic access portal, and this is where we are all having trouble. Any suggestions other than a hardship and forgoing the dollars we've worked for, but the technology is not performing? This is where there should be flexibility in our humble opinion.
I agree with you on that, because that is a really, really difficult one. Now, it's interesting, so the portals, I think that they are, well, I know that they are also certified EHR technology, so it wouldn't be under, they would only be under 2014 edition, right? They wouldn't be under 2011 because it wasn't, maybe they would, and maybe it would go under the combination area that you have the option to attest to the combination of the two. It's a struggle. That one is a really tough one, and I know a lot of people are having a hard time because, one, if you're not able to implement it in time, 2, if you're not able to get the patient signed up or using it, like it's one thing to have something implemented and trained on and have it exist within your practice and integrated with the EHR. It's a completely different thing to market it and get people using it, especially 5% of all your unique patients within the reporting period. So I wish I had better advice. I know that one's a tough one. I think that it sounds like you're spot on with submitting, there's no harm in submitting the hardship exception in case you're unable to meet it. I don't know. What do you think, Brian?
I'm afraid I have no useful advice to offer on that one. Well, let's go to another question. If a Stage 2 provider has 2014 software, but he only refers to providers that are on Stage 1 objectives, can they go back to Stage 1 because nobody that they refer to has direct messaging for the summary of care objectives required in Stage 2?
That one is an interesting. I find a lot of people struggling with that one too. I don't think that you as the provider, it's so tricky because they're really gauging you, each provider, on other people's behavior, whether it's the patient's behavior for the view, download, transmit, or the secure messaging, or another provider's behavior on the transitions of care. But I don't think that just because somebody else is unable to or hasn't upgraded to that position yet, that you're able to do that. And I talked to somebody just about this last week over at AHIMA. What should people do? It's a real issue. And there are entire organizations that will help you go out and essentially do a marketing campaign to all of the different providers that you refer to help them get on board. And in fact, I got contacted just last week by the state of Connecticut that they are offering, in case you didn't know, or if you happen to be in Connecticut or know a provider in Connecticut, they're offering the first year of direct address for free to any eligible provider for this exact reason, to get every provider in the state on board. So they're calling everybody, giving them exactly what they need in order to set them up, and then giving them, 12 months free of a direct address. And I believe after that it's the $80 a year. All I can really recommend is to make sure that you know who all of your, make a significant list of all your referring providers and get in touch with them and try to empower them to get in, signed up. And man, that's a tough piece of advice to give because it's not like you don't already have enough on your plate.
Well, we're almost out of time here, and we didn't get to a lot of questions, and there's a lot of great ones in this list. But again, I want to remind our audience that we're going to take those and send those on to Joy. So look for the follow-up to this webinar because she will address those questions, and everybody then can benefit from seeing the answers to all those different questions. There's a lot of questions out there. Before we conclude, though, I want to mention again that Joy is going to be teaching a Level 2 Meaningful Use workshop series for Format Approved. This is a new venture for us. Joy is the author of our Certified Meaningful Use Professional course, which is very popular, really gives people a great introduction to meaningful use and helps them understand the objectives and CQMs. Well, here in this, what we're calling the Certified Meaningful Use Administrator course, Joy is going to walk students through the attestation process in great detail. So it's going to, of course, include a lot of information, but there's going to be exercises using a live certified EHR that's certified for 2014 that's really going to take you through that process and help you understand what you need to do to successfully attest. So I think it's going to be a great series. If you're interested in learning more, you can go to www.formedworkshops.com and click on the first selection there, the CMUA workshop series. And best of all, you can take a special discount for participating in this learning lunch. If you type in the discount code PTRANSLL, you can take a $120 discount off of the retail price for that. So it's really a great deal, and I urge any of you who are interested to take advantage of that. I should note that there's an expectation that you have a pretty solid understanding of meaningful use for this. So if you haven't taken the CMUP course, that's a prerequisite, although you can test out of it if you feel like you've already got a good understanding. So do take advantage of that. I'd also like to mention that Joy writes a regular column for Format Approved, as well as other industry sources out there. She's a big presence in meaningful use. So do read her column at www.formatapproved.com/HIT answers/author/JoyR. Or when you get these slides, if that's too much, just click on the Ask Joy button. If you go to our homepage and click on content, you'll see her under HIT answers. I would invite everyone as well to join us for our next learning lunch. We do a lot of HIPAA over here at Format Approved, and we're not talking about meaningful use. And so our next learning lunch title is How to Mount a HIPAA One-Day Challenge, and that's on October 14th. So do join us for that event. If you go to our homepage, there's a learning lunch button, or you can just go to www.formatlearning.com to register for those free learning lunch events. So keep an eye on your email box for the follow-up to this event. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to bring this free information to members of the medical community. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Joy, again. Really a great session.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
All right, until next time, everyone.